Imagine an entire generation of children suddenly vanishing, tens of thousands of boys and girls, leaving their villages behind, never to return home. Parents wept, towns were left silent, and rumors spread that ships full of young crusaders had sailed away and simply disappeared. Were they sold as slaves? Did they drown at sea? Or were they victims of the darkest betrayal in medieval history? This is the chilling story of the Children's Crusade of 1212, an event so strange, so tragic that even historians still argue whether it truly happened the way it's told. What we know for certain is this. In the summer of 1212, across France and Germany, thousands of children believed they had been chosen by God to reclaim the Holy Land. But instead of glory, their path led only to mystery and despair. Europe in 1212, a time of crusades. To understand how such a bizarre event could unfold, we need to step back into the early 13th century. The world was still reeling from the failed Crusades. The Christian kingdoms of Europe had already launched multiple holy wars to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Some had achieved brief victories, but by 1212, most crusades had ended in disaster. Thousands of knights and soldiers had died, fortunes had been lost, and Europe was exhausted. And yet the dream of taking back Jerusalem still burned. Preachers in marketplaces shouted about holy wars. Priests spoke of sins being forgiven if one took the cross. People were desperate for hope, and rumors spread that maybe, just maybe, the failures of adults were a sign that children, pure, innocent, untouched by greed, were the ones God truly wanted to lead the way. This dangerous idea planted itself deep into the imagination of medieval Europe. And soon it would sweep entire regions into a storm of blind faith. The French shepherd boy, Stephen of Cloyes. Our story begins in France. In a small village near Chartres, a 12-year-old shepherd named Stephen of Cloyes claimed he had received a vision. According to the legend, Christ himself appeared to him disguised as a poor pilgrim, handing him a letter destined for the King of France. That letter, Stephen said, was a divine command. The children of France must march to the Holy Land, for only they could succeed where knights had failed. Word spread like wildfire. Soon, Stephen began preaching to crowds, his young voice filled with passion. Thousands of children, peasants, shepherd boys, young girls, even some adults swept up in the movement gathered around him. Chroniclers say he promised miracles. The seas would part before them, food would appear when they prayed, and the Muslims would lay down their weapons upon seeing their innocence. Within weeks, Stephen was no longer just a shepherd boy. He was the leader of what would later be called the Children's Crusade. Some say 30,000 children followed him, though numbers are always exaggerated in medieval chronicles. Still, it was clear, an enormous migration of the young had begun. The German boy prophet Nicholas of Cologne, and while Stephen's movement shook France, something eerily similar was happening hundreds of miles away in Germany. A boy named Nicholas of Cologne, about the same age as Stephen, began preaching the same message. Inspired by visions or perhaps by the stories already circulating from France, Nicholas gathered his own following. In the Rhineland, thousands of children joined him, many carrying little more than walking sticks and wooden crosses. Like Stephen, Nicholas promised that miracles would guide them. Their journey would take them across the Alps, a path so dangerous that even hardened armies feared it. And yet the children marched. The Great March. Across villages and cities. Imagine the scene. Dusty medieval roads crowded with barefoot children, chanting hymns, carrying banners of the cross, and filling the air with songs about Jerusalem. To villagers, it must have looked like something holy, even apocalyptic. Some towns cheered them on, offering food and blessings. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But the march was not easy. The children had no real supplies, no armies to protect them, no strategy. Many starved on the road, some froze at night. Others collapsed from exhaustion. Bandits preyed on them. Chroniclers describe bodies lying along the roadside, testament to the terrible cost of this holy mission. Still, the movement kept growing. Every village they passed added more children to their ranks. Parents tried to stop them, but many kids slipped away in the night, believing God had chosen them. It was less an army and more a tide of innocent pilgrims, carried forward by blind faith. The miracle that never came, both Stephen in France and Nicholas in Germany, told their followers that when they reached the sea, a miracle would occur. Just as Moses had parted the Red Sea in the Bible, so too would the waters open for the children of 1212. They would march across the Mediterranean dry shot, straight into the Holy Land. But when they finally arrived at the shores of the sea, whether in Marseille for Stephen's group, or Genoa and Pisa for Nicholas's, no miracle came. The sea remained still. No path opened. No divine sign appeared. Here, the legend takes a dark turn. The disappearance of thousands. In Marseille, two wealthy merchants, Hugh the Iron and William the Pig, offered Stephen's followers ships. They claimed they would carry the children to the Holy Land for free, as an act of Christian charity. Exhausted, desperate, and still full of faith, thousands of children boarded the 7 ships, but they never reached Jerusalem. Some reports claim storms sank several ships near Sardinia, drowning hundreds of children. The rest, it is said, were carried to North Africa and sold into slavery. A few chroniclers even wrote that the merchants themselves were slave traders who tricked the children from the start. As for Nicholas's followers in Germany, their fate was only slightly less tragic. Many died crossing the Alps. Some did reach Italy, but when no miracle appeared at the sea, most simply drifted back home in defeat. Very few survived to tell the tale. A vanished generation. What makes the Children's Crusade so haunting is not just the tragedy, but the mystery. We don't know exactly how many children left. We don't know how many died on the road, how many were enslaved, how many simply disappeared. Some parents waited years for their sons and daughters to return. Most never did. Medieval Europe was shaken. Preachers who had encouraged the children were blamed. Merchants were cursed. And yet, the story quickly faded into legend. Half believed, half doubted. But even now, more than 800 years later, the haunting question remains: what really happened to those missing thousands of kids? The story of the Children's Crusade doesn't end on the seashores of France or Italy. In fact, what came after was just as powerful as the march itself. Centuries of confusion, myths, and debates about what really happened. Were tens of thousands of children truly lost in one of the strangest migrations of the Middle Ages? Or has the story been twisted and exaggerated through time? To answer that, we need to explore the aftermath, the memory, and the mystery of 1212. Shock and silence in Europe when news spread that thousands of young crusaders never returned. Shock rippled across Europe. Chroniclers of the time were divided. Some called the children saints and martyrs, innocent victims of corrupt merchants and cruel fortune. Others condemned them as foolish wanderers, led astray by false visions. The parents, of course, had no such luxury of debate. Many families were left devastated, their children simply gone. Imagine entire villages missing half their youth. It must have felt like a collective wound, one that would not heal for generations. And yet, unlike the great crusades of kings and knights, the Children's Crusade left behind almost no monuments, no official records, no lists of names. It vanished from the memory of governments and churches almost as quickly as the children themselves vanished from the roads of Europe. The legends grow in the decades that followed. The story began to take on a legendary quality. Monks wrote sermons warning of pride and foolish faith. Poets told tales of the holy children who set out to free Jerusalem. Parents used the story to scare their children. Don't wander too far, or you'll end up like the Crusaders of 1212. But here's the strange part. Different. Regions told the story in very different ways. In France, the focus was on Stephen of Cloyes, the shepherd boy prophet. In Germany, Nicholas of Cologne was remembered as the leader. Some accounts merged the two into one story. Others spoke of miracles, of seas that almost parted, or of angels guiding the children. The facts blurred into legend, until it became nearly impossible to tell what was real and what was myth. Historians take a closer look fast forward several centuries. By the 19th and 20th centuries, professional historians began re-examining the story. They asked, could it really be true that tens of thousands of children set out alone on such a march? Or were the medieval chroniclers exaggerating or even misunderstanding what they saw? Some modern scholars argue that the Children's Crusade may not have been entirely made up of children at all. In medieval Latin, the word puer could mean not just children, but also the poor or the powerless. So perhaps the movement was actually a march of the poor peasants, laborers, and young adults, rather than only small children. Others suggest it may have been a type of mass pilgrimage born out of poverty and desperation. Rather than a true crusade, in other words, the children may have been symbolic a way for chroniclers to emphasize their innocence and weakness, even if many were teenagers or young peasants. The role of faith and desperation, whether literal children or symbolic ones, the movement revealed something deep about medieval Europe. Desperation. By 1212, crusading fever had turned into a kind of obsession. People believed that suffering, poverty, or innocence could win God's favor, and who embodied innocence more than children. The story also shows the dark side of faith, how hope can be twisted into manipulation. Merchants took advantage of the children. Preachers encouraged them recklessly. In the end, their innocence offered no protection against hunger, storms, or betrayal. The dark fate, slavery, or death. One of the most disturbing parts of the story is the fate of those who boarded the ships in Marseille. According to some chronicles, 2 of the 7 ships sank in storms near Sardinia, drowning hundreds. The others sailed on not to Jerusalem, but to North Africa. There, the children were reportedly sold into slavery, scattered across markets in Tunis, Alexandria, and beyond. Some may have ended up in wealthy households, others in harsh labor, never to see their homes again. If this is true, then the Children's Crusade was not only a tragedy, but also one of the largest cases of child trafficking in medieval history. Of course, we may never know the full truth, but the rumors of slavery haunted Europe for centuries, adding a layer of horror to an already heartbreaking story. So why has the Children's Crusade fascinated historians, writers, and storytellers for over 800 years? Partly because it strikes at something universal, the vulnerability of children. It's the thought of thousands of young people, filled with blind faith, setting off into the unknown lonely, to vanish as the stuff of nightmares. It also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How could so many parents allow this? How could religious leaders encourage it? Why did no king or pope step in to stop it? The truth is, medieval Europe was a world of extremes: deep faith, deep poverty, and deep desperation. The Children's Crusade was not just a story of kids, it was a reflection of a society that had lost its balance. A society willing to gamble even its youngest lives for a dream of holy war. The haunting legacy. Today, the Children's Crusade is remembered less as a historical event and more as a haunting symbol. Writers and artists have used it to represent innocence betrayed, hope crushed, and the dangers of blind belief. In literature, it inspired poems, plays, and even modern novels. In history books, it is often placed alongside the great crusades of knights and kings, not for its victories, but for its tragedy. And in popular imagination, it remains one of those mysterious, almost unbelievable stories that remind us how fragile the line is between faith and folly. Conclusion. A mystery without end. More than 8 centuries later, we still don't have all the answers. Were they truly children, or simply the poor? Were they led by visions, or by clever tricksters? Did they vanish at sea, or were they swallowed into the slave markets of the Mediterranean? We may never know. But perhaps the true power of the Children's Crusade lies not in the answers, but in the questions it leaves behind. Because in the end, history is not only about kings and battles, it's also about the forgotten, the lost, and the missing. And in 1212, Europe lost not just a group of young crusaders, but a generation of dreams, swallowed by the sea and by silence. The Children's Crusade reminds us of one thing above all, that innocence is fragile, and that when faith blinds reason, tragedy is never far behind.